Beyond 3D.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Matt and Clint here. Hopefully your week has gone swimmingly, and hopefully you've had a good time this week as we head into the spring and the summer down here in the southern half of the world in Australia. And Clint, how was your week this week?
I think the highlight of my week this week was watching the farce that was the presidential debate.
We have to get into that because that was absolutely hilarious. And I think what's more hilarious around the debate is watching the pundits on either side argue over who won it.
I tell you, the Huffington Post Australia put a link on, and you were able to click the link and watch the debate in live time.
Right.
And down the bottom, everyone around the world that was watching was posting comments.
Yes.
But those people that don't know, the Hillary camp and the Trump camp have people on the payroll that sit there and type as well and add their comments to it.
Oh, I believe it.
But that being the case, the comments that were coming up during the debate was, from what I could see, it was 75% pro-Hillary.
Yeah.
Maybe 80% pro-Hillary.
Well, what happened, in my opinion, was the fact that the Republican side, the Trump side, decided to act like she was on death's door, and that what was specifically stated was they don't even know if she would be able to make it through the debate. When people saw her up there animated, never even reached for a glass of water, didn't have to worry about breaks or anything like that, everybody's like, oh, well, that was a bunch of bunk.
We're talking about a woman who had to front up to a congressional hearing and explain herself for 12 hours straight.
Yeah.
She did that debate like it was no effort whatsoever.
Well, going into that debate, I said, one thing I said was it was really interesting, and I thought about it, and I went back to the old Muhammad Ali fights and the old rope-a-dope. And the way they pulled that off, that's exactly what they did. It was the old rope-a-dope, and the Trump people fell for it.
Look, I've said this many times.
Oh, yes.
She is on the chessboard for the American political system. She's there to do a job, and she's there to be set up to make the system work moving forward. Trump's put into the dogfighting arena, if that's what you want to call it, to make it look not so one-sided. And to make it look, they've set him up to be an absolute buffoon. And he is a buffoon. He doesn't have to try very hard.
That's the thing.
A lot of the things during that debate, he spouted off grandiose statements with very little factual evidence to back up what he was saying.
Yeah. Well, the fact of the matter is it's still being talked about now in the States all around. And what some of the people said, and these were people that were not Trump supporters, they were basically saying, if you're going to go into a debate against this woman, use the ammunition that you know can stick, that can actually have an effect. What Bill Clinton did as far as sexually assaulting women can stick. What happened in Benghazi can stick. All of those kind of things is what they should be bringing up. And the other thing they mentioned was he didn't even bother to mention his main plank or his main platform, which was immigration.
She had him on the ropes.
Basically.
Yeah.
And he couldn't really do anything about it. And at the end of it, he said he didn't want to get into, there were certain things he could say, but didn't want to get into them. I'll guarantee you in the next couple of debates, whatever way the format is, I think it's town hall next, he'll bring them up because he really has no choice. And believe you me, she will sit up there with a big smile on her face and just knock them all down.
I honestly don't believe she's even used or scratched the surface with half the ammunition she's got lined up ready for him, because there's 2 more debates to come.
This is the Clintons we're talking about. We're talking about the people who stole George Washington's china from the White House when they left. They're not even, they have so many tricks up their sleeve, it's not even funny. Not even funny. But that's basically what everybody was looking at. It got about 80 to 100 million people worldwide watching this thing.
Well, the rest of the whole world's got an invested interest in it.
Well, basically the whole world is saying, how could you possibly allow a person like Donald Trump get as far as he did, which does not look good for the United States. The thing that I think that's going on in the background that a lot of people don't know about is what's actually going on in Syria.
Oh, that's just disgraceful.
And this whole fight between the Russians and the Americans right now over who bombed who and who's doing what to whom, it's bad.
The amount of video that I've watched in the last probably 3 hours or 4 hours of children being pulled out of rubble is just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And this is the thing people don't get. While this circus is going on in the United States, people are dying
En masse.
And it's just incredible. The Trump people are saying that the Democrats in the United States are trying to blame the Russians, and the Russians have everything to do with it, and they literally look like they're trying to start a World War III, in a sense, in that part of the world. People really need to learn what's going on here. The presidential election, in my opinion, is going to really do nothing insofar as what's going on financially, economically, and as far as diplomatically in the world right now. There are a lot of problems.
Well, all the debts are supposed to be called in this week, aren't they?
Yeah, good luck. And the other thing that's supposed to happen this week that's near and dear to our hearts.
And I just want to say this week, I mean this coming week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that happens, and I believe it happens this evening, as far as Australia is concerned, is that the internet is now in the lovely hands, warm and loving hands of the UN.
Okay, can you explain that?
The United States has gotten together and they have basically stated that the United Nations will now deal with all the IP addresses. The United Nations will deal with everything to do with the internet. They now have the jurisdiction over the internet as of the 1st of October, which happens to be today.
When you think about it and you put it in this kind of logical context, the internet itself is a virtual reality cyber world.
Yes.
So it's interesting that the United Nations now want to use their creepy fingers and get them into that virtual world.
And who did the United Nations talk to about this first? Who has been going around the world to China and places like this? The person who has the basic largest cyber country online known as Facebook, Zuckerberg. Yeah. So they're playing this game as well. So what people are saying now is what's going to happen is there will be a lot more censorship. Certain alt media outlets are basically saying that they're going to be shut down. A lot of this kind of stuff is going to start going on. So what you have is the alt-right, aka white supremacy in the United States, and the Republican Party stating that once the UN takes over this, it is going to be censored like they do in China, and all of their websites will be shut down, turned off, all of their YouTube videos will be censored, and they won't get the right hit counts and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting scenario.
But that's just the top of the internet. That's not the dark web.
Yeah, well, nothing's going to happen to that.
Yeah, but you stop and think about this, right?
Yeah.
If the UN takes control of the internet, what's that going to do to most regular users? They're going to go looking for another way to access and to get out that information that they want, that the UN wants to have control over to shut down. So why not just move it all over to the dark web?
Well, they're going to go looking for another way once they feel they are being censored.
And I say the dark web, Matt. I know you're about to speak then, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologise. I'm just going to reiterate this for people that don't know what the dark web is. The internet, think of an iceberg. The internet that you use at home, that you jump on and do your grocery shopping online, and you might book a holiday and use Facebook, that is the very top of an iceberg. And if anybody knows how an iceberg works, 3/4 of an iceberg is below the surface of the water.
Yes.
That's what the dark web is. The dark web exists parallel with the internet, and the internet that we use, that mum and dad uses every day, it's just that tip of the iceberg. The dark web is everything that's below that. If you want to hire a hitman, you jump on the dark web.
There you go. And I don't think that'll change.
No.
What they're looking to change is what we see. The dark web, anything along those lines, all government agencies and things like that are not touchable. They're untouchable when it comes to the UN control over things. And the other thing I'm finding interesting, I have to look into it because I am not sure. And I think it's a very important point. Barack Obama this week got up in front of the UN and talked about the fact that there might be a need for the United States as a national entity, as a country, to give up some of its sovereign rights for the greater good insofar as world government is concerned, and a lot of people jumped on that as well.
Do you know what those sovereign rights are?
That he was looking to give up?
Yes.
Didn't really say.
Okay.
But the other thing I'm thinking, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, I'll have to look it up. After he retires from the White House around the 17th of January or something like that, is it possible for him to become Secretary General of the United Nations?
No. I'm going to say that's highly likely that that's who will get the... Bill Clinton will get that job. I can see Barack Obama being a high court judge, Supreme Court.
Well, that would be an interesting thing if you put him on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But Bill Clinton in charge of the UN? Fox in charge of the hen house? Really good. Oh, my. Well,
Well, look, when your wife's one of the strongest, the number one political leader in the world, and let's face it, people, she's going to be. It's unrefuted. It's going to happen. Why not just slip your husband into the head of the UN?
well,
The most powerful couple in the world, now that the Brangelinas have broken up.
yeah, good luck to them. Quite frankly, the other thing I was thinking about with this, and we'll have to leave it there for now, is this. If, in fact, she somehow doesn't win, Donald Trump, number one, would be in big trouble because the government in Washington would do everything to make it look like a financial collapse and everything would go to hell in a handbasket and it would be blamed on him and his policies and procedures. And the other thing is, if he were to get in, based upon everything he has stated about the Clintons, he would have to go after them.
Oh, absolutely, he would.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know.
Unbelievable. That would be fun to see.
3/4 of Capitol Hill quake in their boots when she walks around because she knows all the skeletons of everybody's closets.
And you're going to go after that?
No, thank you. Good luck. Beyond 3D.
Welcome back, guys, to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Science news, a lot of things going on. And one of the things we wanted to bring up was that little thing called Planet X.
Yep.
Now, Bugs Bunny aside, well, Daffy Duck, a lot of people are now talking about certain things around this Planet X phenomenon in Nibiru. And one of the things I was reading seemed very interesting to me, and we can just correlate it. Now, allegedly, this, I've heard it called everything from a red star to a blue star to a brown, invisible, dwarfy kind of star. Who knows? But as it comes through this solar system, a lot of turmoil can take place. So what a lot of people are talking about, and I brought it up on the net, and I'll just paraphrase a few of the things that they have up here. If it comes through every 3,600 years, they're saying about 7,200 years ago, you had Noah's floods. So this thing comes through, Noah's floods take place at that point, changes in temperature, violent storms, water avalanches from Antarctica, etc., etc.
Dr. Richard Allen Miller actually talked about that when we had him on a couple of months ago, about the alleged biblical flood and how that changed the world with frost lines and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, so for me, when you go back to a point in time where they weren't as scientifically minded, and you had a group of people that has this happen to them, they're going to explain it in terms that might seem a bit archaic or religious to us more than they would scientific. So something like that can go on. Then if you go forward 3,600 years to 3,600 years prior ago from us as far as we're concerned, you had the Exodus from Egypt.
Yes.
The Jewish Exodus. So that you can talk about that. And then big cataclysms again. And then they're saying if you go 3,600 years from that, we'd be in the time which is now. So it's very interesting. They have tried to make a date on it, but it hasn't really come through. But lately, Clint, you know this, we've been seeing a lot of things on the internet, and a lot of information is coming out about the fact that there is some sort of rock entity thing moving through our solar system, and they're starting to pick it up, but they don't want to mention it or make too many waves.
And they call it, its nickname is the Planet Destroyer. Nibiru. Only because when it's hurtling through the universe like it is, it's dragging along everything behind it as well. Gets caught up in that slipstream, that gravitational pull on its way through. So just think of a out-of-control garbage truck that's hurtling down the road, and let's just think of all the wheelie bins, the rubbish bins flying along behind it, getting pulled along by that force.
Right.
That's what's allegedly on its way.
Well, it's interesting because
Not a giant garbage truck, but a giant planet.
Similar. A garbage planet.
It is a garbage planet, technically.
Yeah, I'm looking at this. It talks about the other thing, Passover.
I just broke my pen again.
Gotcha.
That's 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, Passover, and they talk about how Moses was in the desert and wandering for 40 years, and they're talking about scientifically something like this coming through. Volcanic dust storms can last for up to 40 years before the Earth starts to regenerate itself. You just think about it, even down here, we're in a big area when it comes to bushfires and things like that. But what basically happens happens is it doesn't have to be a human being that starts a bushfire. A bushfire can start from lightning or anything like that. It purges the entire area of forest around it, and then there's regrowth. So something like that can happen, and this could be the impetus for something like that happening on Earth. So there has been a lot of interesting information around Nibiru, and even from so-called expert scientific circles.
Dr. Michio Kaku.
You gotta love him.
I rag on him a lot. I know I rag on him a lot.
Oh, you gotta love him.
But even he's come out and talked about Nibiru. So when the world's #1 leading physicist talks about Nibiru, you better pay attention.
You should sit up and take notice, see what's going on out there.
Let me just look. I'm just looking for something now because I know there's something here on Michio Kaku. Got it. Do you want to listen?
Definitely.
I want to listen. Let's share this with everybody. Beyond, 3, D.
Well, this past weekend, something happened which really disturbed me, and that is the sun is having this temper tantrum, and it's getting worse and worse. We had 5 solar flares erupt last week, 2 just in the past weekend. NASA satellites were just overwhelmed by the size of the flare that came out of the sun. Two flares came out of the sun on Friday and Saturday, and we're headed toward the 11-year sunspot cycle maximum now. And the fear is that one of these solar flares could hit the Earth, in which case all hell could break loose. It's a matter of time. We've had a big one about 150 years ago in 1859. We had a huge solar flare that hit the Earth. Back then, we only had telegraph wires, but even they were shorted out. And you could read the newspaper in Cuba at night by the light of the northern lights, the Aurora Borealis, as far south as Cuba. And from that, we physicists can recalculate how big that solar flare of 1859 must have been. If we were hit with another one like that, it would fry our satellites. Communications would go down instantly. Power plants would be shorted out. And in a worst case, remember, this is a worst case scenario now, we physicists believe that it could be 20 times worse than Hurricane Katrina. So imagine 20 Hurricane Katrinas ravaging the Earth simultaneously. And you can begin to estimate the kind of damage you can get if there's a direct hit from one of these solar flares. And, we're headed toward the maximum. More and more flares are going off the sun. We had another big one last month, by the way. So far, we've dodged a bullet. So far, we've been able to miss the solar flares. But these solar flares are like bullets. Sunspots are like rifles. Think of rifles shooting bullets into outer space and missing the Earth, because, of course, outer space is quite big. But one of these days, one of these solar flares is going to hit the Earth, like what happened in 1859. And then all hell could break loose. Yeah, take a look at what happened in Japan. The backup power generators were in the basement. You can't think of anything worse, any worse place to put a generator than in the basement of a building. It was flooded almost immediately by the tsunami. And so the reactor almost instantly was dead in the water. They had no power. And because he had no power, there was no safety systems. And then we had 3 simultaneous core meltdowns in Fukushima. Plus, the uranium actually liquefied. We've never seen a totally liquefied core before. First time in history. But the Fukushima reactor actually melted totally. And so we could have lots of these around the country if there's a power blackout because of a solar flare. Simultaneously, we lose pump activity, we lose backup power, we lose the ability to control the control rods. It would be a nightmare. Well, it only takes a few hours for a core meltdown to get off the ground. And by the way, at Fukushima, you may ask yourself a simple question. If the core melted completely, then how come we didn't have a China syndrome? How come there wasn't an explosion that blew the roof off like Chernobyl? And the reason is that in Fukushima, one of the workers disobeyed orders. He was under a direct order not to flush the core with seawater, because that would destroy the core. The utility thought they could revive the reactor still. They had illusions about that. But he disobeyed orders. He made the only correct decision during the first few days. He flooded the reactor with seawater, and he stopped the devastation of northern Japan. He's a national hero. And we could have something similar if we lose power in the United States or, around the planet Earth if there's a gigantic solar storm, if there's a hurricane from hell from outer space. Now, we physicists went to Congress last year, and we asked Congress for a few $100 million, that's chump change, to reinforce our power plant, to build a backup grid, to make our satellites so that we could shut them down in case of a major flare, or maybe even have safety systems on the next generation of satellites. And we got nothing. Congress just laughed at us. But, we're the physicists of this country. We're the American Physical Society. We're the organization of physicists in this country. And we said to Congress that these are rare events, maybe once in 100 years, once in a 200-year event, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable that one of these bullets is going to hit the Earth like what happened 150 years ago. And when that happens, it's going to be worse than Katrina. Well, they said things like, times are hard and, the probability of an event is low. But, power blackouts have happened because of sunspot activity in Quebec, Canada, for example, and in South Africa. Certain cities were hit with solar flares, but they were not a direct hit. They were like a grazing blow to the Earth. And we've had power blackouts. Now, see, here's the problem. We're very young in the space age. We've only had experiences with the sunspot cycles for only a few cycles because, Sputnik only went up in 1957. We haven't had experience, but these solar flares have been going on for billions of years. But we never had electricity for billions of years. We've only had electricity for 100 years. And so we have no experience with one of these things. And so it's just like hurricanes. People think that, hurricanes are bad, but they're very rare. So why bother to prepare for them? Then one day it hits you, and then you lose $50 billion like in Hurricane Sandy. And, you can imagine the chaos. If all of a sudden we have power blackouts simultaneously across the country, no rescue crews are going to come in from neighboring cities because they, too, will be knocked out. So you're not going to see ambulances and fire trucks from neighboring cities to take care of us in case of a power blackout. And then food is going to rot in refrigerators, as what happened with Hurricane Sandy. It only takes a few days for food to rot. And new food is not going to come in from the outside because there is no outside. And so food riots are going to start in a few days because people realize that there's no food to eat because all the food is rotten because there's no electricity. And so you can imagine the kind of chaos you're going to have. Now, here in the Northeast, we had Hurricane Sandy. But, we got relief from the outside. The rest of the country was not paralyzed. The airports were up and running in a few days. And so shipments of food, trucks can come in. But can you imagine what happens if there's no outside? That if they, too, are hit simultaneously with one of these solar flares? And, like I said, we're headed for a solar maximum now. In just a few months, we'll hit the peak of this solar cycle. And so the temper tantrums that we had last week will be multiplied in the coming weeks. And there'll be more and more newspaper reports, especially from NASA, monitoring the sun, because we never used to do this before, by the way. We never used to monitor these things. Now we monitor them, because now we begin to realize, oh my God, this could really be a big one. I don't know. All I know is that the laws of physics tell us that this happens every 11 years. The reason for that, by the way, is that the North Pole and the South Pole of the sun flip every 11 years. Because the sun spins, it sort of like winds up its magnetic field lines, like winding the windings of a clock. If you wind the windings of a clock too much, it springs open, it pops out at you, right? That's what happens every 11 years. When the sun spins, it winds up its magnetic field lines, like winding up the windings of a clock. And after 11 years, it can't take it anymore, and goes boing, 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 and goes north-south flips. And so we have a pole shift of the sun every 11 years. And this has been going on, of course, for billions of years. But we didn't have a space program back then.
Beyond 333
Michio Kaku there on solar flares and Nibiru Planet X map.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, get out there and start looking at some of these different infrared and different filtered pictures of what's going on around the sun. Let alone the fact that they're seeing Borg cubes and all kinds of things looking like ships coming in and sucking energy off of it.
I actually saw some police footage the other week.
Yeah.
They were looking at the sky with an infrared camera.
Right.
And spotted a UAP.
Yes. I did see that. Where was that? The Netherlands or Denmark or something? No, over Wales.
It was
Bristol, Wales.
Wales, Bristol.
Yeah. And it was, you couldn't see it with the naked eye, but when you put it on the infrared or the different cameras, you could actually pick it up.
They saw it, yeah.
It's interesting what goes on with that. A lot of these things are around the sun. A lot of these things are coming into our atmosphere. I saw another one recently. It was a few years ago, but it was a similar thing over Puerto Rico in the Caribbean, and it was a UAP. This was a USO because this thing took off over land. It was traveling at an accelerated rate, but the camera locked in on it and watched it go under the water, above the water, changing shape, the whole thing. A lot of things are going on that way.
Hawaii is a hotbed for that.
Hawaii is a hotbed. The other thing that's a hotbed is Northern Ireland, and I know Secure Team just did one.
I know. Are you talking about what happened in Dublin this week?
Belfast or Dublin?
I'm pretty sure.
I think it was Northern Ireland, Belfast. And you see the SWAT teams?
Yes, because there was an alleged crash.
Yes.
Yes.
And they took away wreckage?
Yes.
And you couldn't get anywhere near it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the only people that were there on the scene to deal with it were the local police at the time.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if anything more comes from that because
It won't.
Probably not. Even if they found anything, they'd probably pay them not to show it, which would be very interesting. But there's been a lot of activity, otherworldly. And that's not necessarily. It could be just a lot of different projects that are going on out there. Because remember one thing, guys, and this is a fact. Every time, even now, when you talk about elections and things like that and the different technologies that are being used, when you look at what's being used in warfare right now, when you look at what the next subject we're going to talk about is, which is Elon Musk and what he's talking about with his Mars colonization, what you have to understand is we're talking still about antiquated technology insofar as Black Ops is concerned.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Yep, and I know for a fact, just not even with the sinister stuff, in the United States, I think Stan Deo mentioned this to us when he was on the show, and a lot of other people know this. Dr. Miller mentioned it as well. You can travel from New York to Los Angeles underground in 48 minutes.
Yep. And that's
Maglift
that's not alleged. That's fact.
That's a fact. You'll never be able to do it, neither will I, because we do not have the security clearance to do it. And so, therefore, this is what's going on right now. Anytime, and Clint's mentioned this before, we mentioned the fact that at 9/11, Rumsfeld came out and said there was $2.5 trillion missing. Well, Clint mentioned, I think, a few shows back that number's up to about $6.5 to $8 trillion.
8 trillion now.
Yeah. Therefore, they're building more goodies. So that's what happens with that stuff. So when that goes on, just recognize the fact that the money's not missing. It's been used, and they know what it's been used on. They just cannot tell you because it's all classified. And a lot of times, government doesn't even know it because most of this stuff is done in the private sector.
I can guarantee you for a fact that our political leaders would have absolutely zero knowledge on this stuff.
They can't have knowledge on it because therefore they would go, wait a minute, this is a CEO of a company. What do they do?
Play golf.
Besides that, what are they there for? You're a chief executive officer. Therefore, what you are doing is you have certain departments underneath you. You put people in charge of those departments who you can trust, and therefore, what do they have to do? They present certain material to you, certain interests that have to be maintained from a company standpoint, from a country standpoint. That's all it comes down to. If there is an entity that is outside of your purview and they are doing projects and they're working with your military in certain instances, it's none of your concern. You have nothing to do with that because all you have to do is worry about what's going on in the EPA and the Defense Department, in NSA and those different departments, and you are chief of the Navy in the United States and the Army and the Air Force and the Marines. You worry about that. They're not going to tell you everything. Under any circumstances, you will never, ever know it.
Well, if you don't need to be read in, you don't need to be read in.
And that's who told that? Bush, when he was in charge of the CIA. Bush Sr. Who did he say it to? To Jimmy Carter?
Yes.
You don't need to know. He didn't care if he was the president of the United States at the time or not. We're not telling you anything. And that's the end of it. What is he going to do? Nothing. He can get rid of him as head of the CIA. He's still not going to learn it. So we digress there for a little bit. But what we're going to do now is, and we're going to get into the fact that, with Planet X and Nibiru, this thing is supposedly or allegedly in between somewhere like Neptune and Saturn and heading this way. So we will see in the next year or two exactly what happens.
And let's not fearmonger here. When we say it's headed this way, there's not a 100% guarantee it's going to crash into this planet. There's not a 100% guarantee it's going to come anywhere near us, but it is headed this way.
Yeah, and there could be, I would worry more about solar flares and things going on the sun than I would about Nibiru coming through, quite frankly. I think the sun and what's going on there is a lot more important. The other thing with this is a lot of people will take this and go back to Hopi prophecies and all these kinds of things, and they talk about the different stars, and it's almost... they're polar opposites in a sense, because they talk about these Cucinas and things like that, red Cucina and blue Cucinas and the different planets and everything like that. And the red Cucina is supposedly Nibiru. Blue Cucina is a dead star or something like that. But when you look at it in scientific terms, a blue star has more energy than a red giant star, which is on its last legs and dying.
If anybody doesn't know what a solar flare is, it occurs when a magnetic energy that has built up in the solar atmosphere is suddenly released, and the radiation is emitted across virtually the entire electromagnetic spectrum, from radio waves at the long wavelength end through to the optical emission to X-rays and gamma rays at the short wavelength end. Mm-hmm. Now, last time that happened here,
right,
on Earth, it knocked out everything.
Yep. Yeah.
And we weren't alive then.
Doesn't matter. If that happens, there's not much we're going to be able to do about it. It is what it is. Don't worry about it. It's not that important in the grand scheme of things, because there's a lot more going on here.
1859.
There you go.
That was the last
I wasn't
flare.
alive then.
No.
At least I don't think so. If I was, I don't remember it. But yeah, so Nibiru's around. A lot of things are going on in the solar system. The other thing that went on in the solar system is this week, Jupiter's moon, Europa, NASA came out and announced that they did actually find water plumes.
You called that?
Yeah, it's always water, because water could lead to life, but it'll take them another 20 years before they can get to the point where they can understand the fact that there is life out there as well. So yeah, it says jets of liquid water on Europa might be first signs that the planet could support life. That is what is being stated, but that has been stated before. Suffice it to say, this is not the only planet that has life on it, as far as I am concerned, and we'll just leave it at that. But on and up and over and through, Elon Musk has been very busy in the past few weeks. Personal life aside, he's been very busy in the past few weeks. And one of his pet projects now, a project that he is raising a lot of money for, is Mars colonization by the year 2025.
He's going to get a rude shock when he gets there.
And finds out they're going to go, hi.
I honestly don't believe, and this is just me personally, I do not believe that SpaceX is going to make it there. Because there is no way that the powers that be will allow this to happen, considering what's going on there at the moment.
Well, the fact of the matter is, the rocket a few weeks back blew up on the launch pad. A lot more like that can start happening. And when that does start to happen, and you start all of a sudden to see that they've decided they can't send a manned project up there, what they'll do instead is possibly just send some more probes up, government funded and government sanctioned. Then all of a sudden it'll be a lot better as far as they're concerned, because guys, if you go up, and there are a lot of websites and a lot of people that work on anomalies on Mars and things like that, if you look at it from a scientific standpoint, there were nuclear events that happened on the surface of that planet.
Oh, they've already got readings back that states that very, very
absolutely
specifically.
The other thing is, when you look through what is considered the rock formations, as far as I'm concerned, what you're looking at is rubble from ancient civilizations. We are not talking about something that happened 1,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, or 7,000 years ago. You are looking at the remnants of something that happened, at least in my opinion, between 750,000 and 1 million years ago. And when you
no, just say that figure again.
750,000 to 1 million years ago.
Okay, so that's way out of the concept that most people would be able to comprehend.
Which is why they will never admit that there were humanoid type, if not human type civilizations on that planet, and that planet looked exactly like Earth did. And there's a movie called Mission to Mars, and at the end of that movie, when you look at it, because who was in that movie? Gary Sinise was the actor. When you look at the series where they go into the face on Mars, and they go through this whole rigmarole of this series of events happens, and they find out that there was a species there, and that species left because there was a cataclysmic event that happened on Mars. Okay, so Mission to Mars was Brian De Palma. He was the director of that movie back in 2000. And what was stated when that movie came out was that little bit at the end there, showing the exodus from Mars and the fact that they went in two directions, and one of the directions that they sent their DNA, for lack of a better term, into this Earth to populate this Earth, and they also went out to the stars to a new planet, and then all of a sudden Gary Sinise is put into this tube which is filled with a liquid where he thinks he's going to drown, but then he realizes he can breathe in it, and this ship just takes off from the planet as the Cydonia area face on Mars implodes on itself, and he takes off to go where the original builders went.
Oh, so we're talking. So when you're saying seeding a planet, that's panspermia. But when you're saying going to the original builders, that's kind of very much like the engineers out of Prometheus, which I know you haven't seen yet.
No, I haven't seen it.
I'm going to slap you.
One day. But no, quite frankly, if you think about it, it would be like us. If, this planet is dying, but there's another planet that you can see within the next 150,000 to 500,000 years will be able to sustain human forms of life, you might, and it's not that difficult. All you have to do is go in, take some of your DNA out, blood test, whatever, and you just send it off there, and it mixes in, and everything all of a sudden, boom, up you come. But that does not mean that you, in the form you are now, doesn't exist anymore. You move on to the next level. You move on to the next realm. Spiritually, we're talking about samadhi. We're talking about liberation. We're talking about evolution. We're talking about nirvana as far as Buddhists are concerned. We're talking about going outside of the human form, and your consciousness can take off and go to wherever it needs to go. And once it gets there, it can say, look, new planet, what do we need to be able to exist here? And you create it. So stuff like that can be going on. So when I look at Mars, I'm looking at our past as far as I am concerned. But then again, when I look at Venus, I think I'm looking at our past, because they're finding structures there as well.
It's just totally folly to think that where we are now is the center of the universe.
It's not.
And the origin of life. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and there's a vid, guys, out on YouTube. I'll see if I can put a link up to it. At the International Space Station, you see all these different, they call them UFOs, but a lot of times they cut the feeds. But when you look at them, they're alive. We've mentioned this before. It is not just a spaceship made up of metals and things like that. These are entities that can live in space. It would be as if you were diving in the ocean and you had your scuba gear on. There are all kinds of amoeba. There are all kinds of fish. There are sponges. There are many different live entities that live in that environment. What I'm saying is, when you get out into space, there are living entities that live in the environment of space. And that is what is going on, but they don't want to admit even that.
Oh, that's
and the
just
day is government.
That's just a total reality smasher.
Absolutely. Anyway, guys, Elon Musk, Mars colonization by 2025. Basically, humans are a multi-planetary species, and therefore that is what he is trying to get us to become. He's using his technologies, using SpaceX, talking about how you could get humanity to colonize Mars. And he says in its current form, one person going to Mars would cost about $10 billion, so you have to bring the cost down. So what we're going to do is play you a bit of an excerpt of a video that was on The Verge video on YouTube, and Lauren Grush is the lady's name that is speaking about a synopsis of what Elon Musk said down in Guadalajara in Mexico about the colonization of Mars. And believe you me, when he was about to speak, when you look at the videos of the people rushing into the room to get a front row seat, it was absolutely amazing how many people were there wanting and willing to listen to what this person, who they consider to be a visionary, had to say on the topic of Mars. We will give you a little bit of an excerpt here right now, and then what we want you to do, and we'll put a link up to it on the Facebook page, is we want you to get out there. It's about an hour and a half long, so if you have some time, look at little snippets and see exactly what he's saying about what his ideas and ideals are when it comes to making humanity an interplanetary species.
Hit it, Matt. Beyond,
3,
D.
What I really want to try to achieve here is to make Mars seem possible, make it seem as though it's something that we can do in our lifetimes.
Elon Musk finally told the world his vision for colonizing Mars, and it turned out to be one hell of a show. His talk in Mexico drew insane crowds. People actually stampeded into the hall where his lecture was in order to get a good seat. They were then treated to a 1-hour breakdown of all the vehicles Musk wants to build in order to bring people to the Red Planet. So let's unwrap all of this and talk about what it means. It starts off like any science fiction. You need a spaceship. A vehicle to carry up to 100 passengers, maybe more, and 450 tons of cargo to Mars. First, the spaceship will be launched into Earth orbit thanks to a massive rocket booster, and I mean massive. When completed, this rocket would be bigger and more powerful than NASA's Saturn V rocket. The thing would be powered by a combination of 42 Raptor engines. That's the new powerful engine that SpaceX has been working on. They also did their first full-scale test of the engine the other day too. But unlike the kerosene engines that power the Falcon 9, this one runs on methane. More on why later. So, the booster takes the spaceship into orbit. The two vehicles separate, and the booster comes back to land on Earth. It's one of SpaceX's signature moves, similar to how the Falcon 9 lands post-launch. But once that booster lands, it quickly gears up for its next launch of a propellant tank. That tank then docks with the spaceship in orbit, filling it up with the gas it needs to get to Mars. Musk said it'd take maybe 3 to 5 propellant tanks to fully fuel the spaceship's trip. Then the spaceship is off to Mars. Once it arrives, the entire thing lands using its engines to lower itself down to the ground. It's a technique called supersonic retropropulsion. And again, it's just like the Falcon 9 landings. It's also a way of getting super heavy payloads safely down to Mars, which doesn't have a very thick atmosphere to help slow falling objects. After letting out its passengers, eventually the spaceship will lift off and come back to Earth. And where will it get the fuel for that return trip? On Mars. You see, that's why SpaceX is using methane, because it can be made using carbon dioxide from the planet's atmosphere or possible subsurface water. That saves SpaceX from bringing the fuel for the return trip over beforehand.
Elon and the team at SpaceX have showed really well that nothing speaks for itself quite like results. So I think the most important thing for Elon and for everyone who backs Elon and the team at SpaceX to do is to go out and to take some of these technologies that he showed off today, like the giant composite tanks and the Raptor engines, and just keep developing those and keep testing those.
So it sounds like he's thought it all through, right? But for all the things that Musk did say, he left out a few key parts of his human settlement idea, namely how these people are going to survive. A good analogy for living on Mars is kind of like living in Antarctica, but worse.
We have a science base in Antarctica all the time, hundreds of people there all the time. But you don't go there to raise a family, you don't build playgrounds. I love SpaceX, I love what they're doing, it's fantastic. They have changed the way people think of space exploration, but I don't think you want a colony on Mars. I'm open-minded, of course. But if you've ever been to Antarctica, there's nothing to eat. There is nothing to drink, and you can breathe. On Mars, you can't breathe. You can't breathe, everybody. That's serious.
Yet Musk said nothing about the types of habitats these people would live in, and very little about how they would eat, drink, and breathe. And when asked about the dangers of a space voyage like deep space radiation or solar flares, he had this to say.
So I actually think the radiation thing is it's often brought up, but I think it's not too big of a deal. There's certainly some risk of radiation, but it's not deadly.
There was also little talk of in-space life support systems, and perhaps the biggest issue of all, microgravity. Living in space can lead to severe bone density and muscle loss, and things at Mars may not be much better. The planet has 1/3 the gravity of Earth, which could also wreak havoc on the body. We don't know yet, but for SpaceX, these problems aren't the company's primary concern. In fact, Musk said that the first colonists would have to be willing to risk death.
I mean, the goal of SpaceX is really to build the transport system. It's like building the Union Pacific Railroad. And once that transport system is built, then there's a tremendous opportunity for anyone who wants to go to Mars and create something new or build the foundations of a new planet.
But even some of the engineering claims that Musk made were a little ambitious. He claimed that the spaceship could eventually make the trip to Mars in just 80 days if accelerated fast enough. That's an insane estimate, given that most trips to Mars take upwards of 6 months. Getting to such a speed would take a lot of energy, and then a lot of energy to break. He also envisions not just one spaceship going to Mars at a time, but eventually 1,000. Let's do the math there. The launch window for Mars opens up every 26 months, so you'd have to launch 1,000 spaceships in that time frame. And then since each spaceship needs at least 3 fuel launches, that equates to 3,000 launches in 26 months. That's more than 15 times the world's launch rate, and an unbelievable amount of reused rockets. And then there's the timeline and cost estimates, both of which seem super optimistic. Musk hopes to complete the first development spaceship in 4 years, and then send the first big spaceship to Mars as early as 2024. That's ambitious given SpaceX hasn't ever launched people into space yet. He also says that factors like reusability and propellant production on Mars means the entire thing can be done for way less than current Mars estimates. The ultimate result? 1 million people living on Mars in 40 to 100 years. But that timeline is very tentative, especially since SpaceX isn't putting a lot of money into the Mars plan just yet. Less than 5% of the company's resources are going into the development of the interplanetary transport system. And even with these low cost estimates, Musk says that he's still probably going to need help, either from NASA, the government, or the private sector. So it's clear this is just the starting off point. There are a lot of problems to solve ahead, but Musk says there's only one way to solve them.
The technology does not automatically improve. It only improves if a lot of really strong engineering talent is applied to the problem that it improves.
Beyond 3D. Welcome back this week, everyone, to another episode of Beyond 3D. I really enjoyed that, Matt.
Oh, yeah. Look, the thing I loved about that was they gave you the pros and the cons of it all. It wasn't just a soundbite of Elon Musk and all the positives. It was, this is what we believe can happen, this is what we believe can't happen. And sometimes you need that kind of an analysis to give you a better picture of what's going on. So about Elon Musk and his SpaceX in that little video, pay no attention to Bill Nye, the science guy, and his little tirade about what's going on out there.
I don't like Bill Nye.
Not a fan.
Not a fan.
Hell, they even make fun of him on the Big Bang.
Yeah, well, what does that tell you?
I think it's a fabulous idea. I think, but what you said earlier is going to be factual. You're going to get up there and you're going to find out that there were civilizations there before.
Well, that's like the English sailing to Australia and getting here and thinking to themselves, look at this beautiful place we've discovered, and finding out that it's already populated.
That's it. And then all of a sudden, just wipe them out and keep on going.
Oh, I could have said the Mayflower.
You could have said the Mayflower because they wiped them out and kept on going as well. That was the English for you,
and the
and the Portuguese, and the French, and the Spanish, and those from the Netherlands, the Europeans. So yeah, interesting. But quite frankly, ultimately. And this is the thing, and one of my teachers said this to me, at least 10 or 15 years ago. 5,000 years from now, you will have your world government, but it will be done in the proper way. And there will be many iterations of it between, and you're just going to have to fight your way through them. There'll
be plenty of eggs broken to make that omelette.
Oh, absolutely.
Between now and then.
Absolutely. So that's something that you're going to have to think about. With everything going on in the world right now, and I mean, we're talking about newspaper headlines, talking about the world is going to hell, all the negatives. There are people out there in the scientific communities, there are people out there in the religious and spiritual communities, more spiritual than religious, that are out there doing the good work. There's somebody we know that will be leaving Australia and heading up to Iowa.
Really?
Yeah, and Michael.
Oh, Susie.
Yes. And
Mr.
why is he doing that? Because he's into transcendental meditation, and they're going to be up in the United States and do meditations to send positive energy to everything that's going on in the United States to help quell the disdain and the discord going on up there right now.
I knew he was off to India. I didn't know he was off to the States.
Yeah. So this is what's going on. There are people out there that are doing the good works as well. And speaking of good works, some might say it's good, some might not. I've been emailing back and forth with Guy Consolmagno, and he will get on the show. But what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of an excerpt or a taste of what he's about. What he's doing as the head of the Vatican Observatory, as they say, the Pope's astronomer, they call him. Just how he feels about the mixing of the two, the mixing of the scientific community and the religious community. And I think you'll find this interview very, very interesting. It was from a show called, I believe it's called The World Over. This was done in 2014, and it's an excerpt of Brother Consolmagno about the Vatican Observatory, religious principles, scientific principles, how they don't necessarily, they're not like oil and water. They do actually complement each other. And so we'll take a listen to this clip and then we'll come back and we can keep going from there.
Sounds great.
Welcome back to The World Over. In May, Pope Francis set tongues a-wagging when in a homily during his morning mass, he referenced a visit from extraterrestrials. The media ran with it and suggested that the Catholic Church was confirming the existence of intelligent life on other planets. It wasn't exactly what the Pope was trying to say, but it did create an interesting opportunity to discuss the relationship between faith and science. Are the two in opposition? Joining us tonight is a man who has literally pondered the mysteries of the heavens as part of his job. He is an astronomer at the Vatican Observatory and the president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, a Jesuit, and the co-author of the new book, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? We're delighted to have joining us Brother Guy Consolmagno in studio. Great to see you, brother.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with this notion that people have, that there's a conflict between faith and science. You don't see it that way.
Well, of course not. I mean, here I am. I've got a collar and an MIT ring, which proves you can be at the same time a fanatic and a nerd. and I am. I'm something of a nerd about my religion, but I'm a fanatic about my science. And what people have to remember is that science came from the church.
Yep.
It was invented in the medieval universities. Even the Galileo affair that everyone wants to throw at us because they don't have anything else to throw at us, which tells you something there.
Yeah.
Why was the church interested? Because it was interested in science, because it's interested in the physical universe, because it's interested in creation as an expression of the Creator.
I love that. And we're going to get into the book, which really is a back and forth with you and your co-author, a Jesuit priest, and a colleague at the observatory.
Paul Muller,
Yeah, and it is really grappling with the big questions that people have.
Yes.
And along the way, though, it's really a philosophical, artistic, educational tour and a scientific exploration as well. You've kind of woven all of that in a beautiful package.
Well, the one thing you hope you also got was a good laugh out of it.
Oh, yeah, no, it's lighthearted.
It's very lighthearted. If it's not fun, why don't we,
Why do you want to do that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's back up a little bit before I get into some of these big questions you grapple with. How did you come to this profession, and where did your interest in science begin?
Well, I'm a baby boom kid and a Sputnik kid. I started kindergarten when Sputnik went up. I finished high school at UAD High when people landed on the moon. And when I decided not to become a Jesuit my freshman year at BC, which is another long story in itself, I discovered that MIT, where my best friend was going, had the world's biggest collection of science fiction. So I transferred there only to read science fiction. By accident, got into the Earth and Planetary Science department, discovered there are rocks that fall from the asteroid belt called meteorites. You can touch outer space. What could be more thrilling?
Wow. What did you read?
Trash. Wonderful trash. Space opera,
Yeah. I love it.
And I still to this day enjoy reading wonderful adventure stories that remind you that this universe is something that we live in. It's not just things we ponder about, but planets are places where people have adventures.
I love that. I love that. The book starts, one of the first questions you all wrestle with is the whole question pitting the Big Bang against the book of Genesis.
Right.
They are in absolute conflict. Many say you have to either side with one or side with the other, and science disproves the book of Genesis. You would say what?
Well, first of all, the book of Genesis is not a science book because science books weren't invented when the book of Genesis was written. But not only that, I've got two really thick books in my desk. One is the Bible, one is Misner, Thorne and Wheeler's treatise on general relativity called Gravitation. Misner, Thorne and Wheeler's book is 30 years old and it's out of date. Science books go out of date. They're supposed to go out of date. Books of theology, books of philosophy, Shakespeare, Plato, those books don't go out of date. The Bible does not go out of date because it's not a science book. It's a book about God. And you can find 3 different stories of creation in the Bible. All of them have one thing in common. No matter how you think the world was made, God did it deliberately out of love. That's the message that Genesis gives us. Genesis tells me who's responsible for the universe. My science tells me how he did it. But more than that, both of those things misunderstand what religion is and what science is. Science is not a big book of facts. Religion is not a big book of rules. Religion is something that you live. Science is a conversation we have about the facts, and we're never convinced we've got all the facts. Otherwise, I'd be out of a job as a scientist.
We don't want that to happen. Tell me a moment. You are an astronomer, and probably, I guess, the biggest star of all time is the star of Bethlehem.
Right.
Is there any evidence to prove or disprove, astronomy-wise, that there was a Bethlehem star? What might this have been?
Oh, well, that's the embarrassing thing. There are so many candidates. You can go onto Amazon, type in, Star of Bethlehem. You'll get 400 different books. Everyone giving you a different story. Well, this one's right, and obviously all the other guys are wrong. There are some that I think are fairly convincing, and others that maybe not. The bigger question is, why do you care so much? Why is it so important? What is at stake in there being a Star of Bethlehem? And that's what we try to get at in the book, is really, what's motivating you to worry about this? The real question is, does God act in the universe? Does God do things like make stars? Does God do things like have miracles? And what is it to be a miracle? Nowadays, we think of miracles, like the star might have been, as God violating the laws of nature. But that's not what a miracle is, because there were miracles before we had laws of nature.
Well, as a scientist, particularly as one who gazes up and watches this new phenomena, seeing things that, frankly, many of our eyes will never see, has it caused doubt to creep into your faith, or has it expanded your faith?
How could it cause doubt? Truth does not contradict truth. St. John Paul II said that. And he's quoting a long line of theological argument going back to Thomas Aquinas and before then. Anything that we learn in the universe that's true brings us closer to God. But here's what I've learned personally as an astronomer, that the universe is logical. It didn't have to be logical. It could have been chaos, but it isn't.
It's designed.
The universe has rules that it follows. Didn't have to be that way. The pagans all thought that, lightning happened because the god of lightning threw things, and if it's just the gods doing stuff, then there's no logic. It would be impossible to do science. But Christianity says no. God does things in an orderly way, in a logical way. He obeys his own laws. Now, here's the amazing thing. Of all of that, I could say the universe is logical, the universe has laws. But what I would never have expected is that it's so beautiful. At the end of the day, it's not only logical, but when you see a sunset, it gives you joy. And when you understand Maxwell's equations that explain the colors, that gives you joy.
No, it deepens. It deepens the wonder and the awesomeness of the Creator.
It's a way that we have of playing with God. It's how God can interact with us, because he wants us to love him with our hearts, but also our minds and also our souls.
I need to share something with you. I teased it at the beginning of the segment. Pope Francis, during one of his morning homilies, had this to say. I'll share it with the audience. He said, imagine if, for example, tomorrow, an expedition of Martians came, green with long noses and big ears, just like children draw them, and were to say, I want to be baptized. What would happen? Now, the media went crazy when he said this. What was he trying to say? And then I'll pop the big question to you.
Well, of course, he was really talking about that scene in the early church where they're trying to decide whether or not to let Gentiles in. And for them to accept Gentiles into their religion was as strange and as frightening to them as having Martians would be for us today. That was the point he was trying to make. And a wonderfully creative point.
Now, here's the big question. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial?
Only if she asks.
Okay. Well, you're going to call me when this happens, because I'd like to be there at the font where you do it.
It's fascinating. We get emails all the time. I got one just this past week. The Pope has to say that it's like he has to, people are convinced not only that there's extraterrestrials, but by golly, they're just like what they read about in the papers, or they're just like what they had a dream about last night.
E.T.
Do I think it's out there? Probably, but I don't have the data.
Stephen Hawking, the physicist, who is a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science, said because of the laws of physics, it has removed the need for God. First of all, what did he mean by that, and does he have a point?
He has a point in that if you think God is, by definition, what started the universe, and then you say, well, actually, what started the Big Bang was a fluctuation in the gravity field, all you're doing is you're proving that, well, God must be gravity, which might explain why Catholics, celebrate Mass, but that's not what we think God is. That's not the Christian idea of creating out of nothing. Do you remember as a kid the game Mousetrap?
Sure.
There's this really complicated thing, and you crank
like
it up,
a little roller coaster, and you drop
and then you start one thing off, and it goes blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And they think that God is the person who starts things off, but no, God's the guy who invented the game back at the Ideal Toy Company 5 years earlier. If you reduce God to just another force along with gravity or electricity, you're turning God into a nature god. You're turning God into the god of lightning again. You're reducing God nothing more than Zeus. But God is not a nature god. God is supernatural. When God supports the universe at every instant, because God is outside of time, God allows there to be laws of nature. God allows there to be gravity. God allows there to be a universe. And then, as He creates us, He gives us the freedom to love Him in return.
Talk for a moment, I'm getting a few emails about this, about the creative design movement, which was kind of formulated in reaction to evolution. How is the Catholic to look at both of these? And as a scientist and a man of faith, you would say what?
Well, God is not something you come to at the end of a long line of logical proofs. Nobody has ever been convinced by a syllogism. Nobody's ever been converted by a syllogism. God is what we start with. If I believe in God and I believe in the Creator, then I can see evidence of His work throughout the universe. If I believe that the universe is nothing but mechanism, I'll see evidence of nothing but mechanism, because I'm just returning back to the very thing I assumed in the first place. The thing that worries me when people try to use science to prove God is that they're making science bigger than God as a result. I'm a scientist. I love science, but I don't want it to be someplace where it doesn't belong.
Has it deepened your faith? The exposure to science?
Science deepens my faith, but it's really the other way around. Faith is what makes it possible for me to do science. Faith is what makes me want to do science. You'll find a terrible thing happens when scientists are out there and they've lost the faith in truth, that they've lost the faith. Stephen Hawking thinks that God was the force that started things. But Stephen Hawking is dedicated to truth. But God is truth. If you're worshiping truth, you're worshiping God. They sometimes, when an atheist tells me they don't believe in God, I ask them, well, what's the God there are a lot of versions of God. I don't believe it. I only believe in one God.
Yes, and many times they believe in multiples. So, Brother Guy, thank you so much for being here. It's a fascinating book. Would you baptize an extraterrestrial? Questions from the astronomers' inbox at the Vatican Observatory. Before I let you go, very quickly, tell us about the Vatican Observatory. It's there at Castel Gandolfo. You've got one in the backyard, in the Vatican Gardens, and here in Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, the church literally supports astronomy. The telescopes are on the roof of the Pope's summer home. We have a dozen astronomers from 5 continents. We speak 8 languages, and that's just one of our guys. We cover every kind of astronomy. We work with the regular astronomers. We collaborate with astronomers around the world. We've even been elected to astronomers' positions in the International Astronomical Union.
It's amazing.
We were involved in demoting Pluto, I'm afraid.
Oh, well, I'm sorry for poor Pluto, but there's always Donald Duck and Mickey. You can visit the Vatican Observatory online at vofoundation.org. It's a fascinating gift, really, to the whole church.
Beyond 3 D.
Well, Clint, that's a little bit of an excerpt on Brother Consolmagno, and the thing I love about him is his enthusiasm when he's talking about both his religious beliefs and the scientific community. It's fascinating.
I love the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, he's in charge of Lucifer, isn't he?
He is.
And I'm not talking about the Hellspawn. I am talking about the Vatican's telescope.
Absolutely. Castel Gandolfo, and also in Arizona. He's in charge of all of those things.
And that telescope is essentially built to hunt for extraterrestrials in the infrared spectrum.
And what they're basically saying is, if everything is God's creation, I'm my own synopsis of it, and there are aliens out there that want to be baptized, why not? There's nothing wrong with anything like that. Some people, I think what tends to happen in the scientific community, they tend to do things in absolutes. And that can be to their detriment. And I think that's why string theory right now is very important, because the absolutes are no longer sacrosanct. They are now looking at things from a different perspective and recognizing the fact that just because, well, they're recognizing exactly what you say at the end of the show every week.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
That's it. And with that, it's about time for us to head on down the road for another week. And thank you guys for listening to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Take great care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of this time until next week, when we get together again with some more really interesting information for you.
And Matt,
yes,
before we go, just a little community service message to everybody in Australia on the East Coast. You need to put your clocks forward an hour tonight.
Daylight savings and all that fun stuff. We lose an hour, but we'll gain it back in 6 months' time.
Time's illusionary. You don't lose anything.
Absolutely correct, actually. Nothing whatsoever. Don't worry about it. Just do it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.